So I tweeted out the other day and said, send me NFL draft hot takes for a video. I need an excuse to correct some common mock draft complaints. If you ever want to compete and participate in these, I should say, go to @BengalYouTube, hit me with a follow on Twitter, and we'll go ahead and dive into these. So I would say probably the biggest mock draft complaint I get before we dive into the actual hot takes from you guys is based on, a common insert team and position, and it's, why would the Saints draft a receiver? We need a defensive tackle. And it's like, that's not how the NFL draft works. It's not just, the Giants need a receiver more than any other position. Surely they will take a receiver in round one. It kind of reminds me of this meme a little bit with Patrick from SpongeBob, where it's like, aren't you Patrick Star on this ID? And he's like, yeah, it's me. Like, this is your ID? Yup. I feel like I could make one of these where it ends with like, this is not my wallet. Basically, you can see how it goes if you're not familiar with the show. It's like, this is your ID. I found this ID in this wallet. Surely, in that case, this wallet is yours. Take the wallet. And he's like, well, it's not mine. This is kind of how I feel with some of these mock drafts. Take the Saints, for example, because we're talking about them. Real comment I got was, the Saints are never going to take a receiver. We need defensive tackle. If there is not a defensive tackle worth taking, they are not taking a defensive tackle there. So teams don't just have one need, they have multiple needs. And the way most teams in the NFL draft, if not all, is based on a range of their big board. They will be comfortable taking a player at the top of their board where they're picking within a few spots, depending on positional need. That's pretty much how that goes. So if you're the Saints and you have a player at number 1 currently available on your big board, and maybe it's the 4th or 5th position that you need to upgrade on your team the most, they're not going to take a player who's 15th or 20th on their big board because it's their number 1 position that they need to upgrade the most. That's just generally not how the NFL draft works. So when we get into these mock drafts, I'm not just going to say, okay, you know what, the top 5 receivers are off the board. They went 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the draft, and the drop off to 6 is huge, but here are the Falcons who need receiver more than anything else. Let's plug in any old receiver because they need a receiver. It just doesn't work like that. But a lot of the, I would say probably younger viewers and more stupid in general are just not familiar with how the NFL draft works, and they go, we need receiver, mock receiver to us. It just doesn't work like that. But for the first hot take, we'll start with my buddy Andy. Says 0 QBs go in the top 3. And this one is tough. The NFL draft is crazy. Things go in a bunch of different directions, and it is very difficult to predict. And this one, I can see it happening. And this is where we're going to be like in a weird area in this video where a lot of my answers is I could either see it or I couldn't see it. It's not a yes or a no because that's just not how it works. We just don't know. But 0 QBs go in the top 3. There are one of 2 ways this goes, I think. You have the Bears trade out of the number 1 spot, right? And a quarterback goes at number 1. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. And then you get to the Texans at 2, where it's maybe a quarterback, maybe something else. But I think the odds are probably at least about 50% based on how I'm perceiving things, that the Texans take a QB at that number 2 spot. So I think you can almost plug in a QB at 1 and 2. So the fact that 0 would go in the top 3, I'm not sure that I buy that. There is a scenario where the Bears stick at number 1 and take a defensive player. If that happens, I think a quarterback certainly goes at number 2. But if we expect the Bears to move out of the number 1 spot, a QB is going to go number 1 overall, almost certainly. And then the Texans at 2 are either a QB or not. And then the Cardinals, I guess, wouldn't. But either way, I see at least 1 quarterback going in the top 3, if not 2. I think it's going to be Will Levis, Bryce Young, and with CJ Stroud in there, who knows? If the Cardinals want to move down with a new regime coming in, that might be a good move for them, and they can just stockpile draft picks. And we could see 3 quarterbacks go in the top 3, even though I don't think that's so likely. But I can't get on board with this. I don't think it happens. I think we see at least 1. This one's going to be interesting. Got a few likes from James here. This one's tough. If the Jets don't get Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers, of course, in a trade with the Packers, they should draft a quarterback. And that one's difficult for me because they did spend a first-round pick on Zach Wilson at number 2 overall just a couple of years ago. He's going into year 3. We have not been very inspired by Zach Wilson up to this point. Who knows if he's even going to start another game for the Jets? That's unknown. However, if they don't get Rodgers, I'm not sure they should invest another top pick at quarterback. The Jets pick currently, I believe, at number 13. So what quarterback's going to be available there? Maybe Anthony Richardson, and then you start talking about Hendon Hooker and Tanner McKee maybe in round 2. So should the Jets just shoehorn themselves into taking a quarterback in maybe the second round? Because who knows what's going to be available at 13? And if you can't develop the player, it doesn't matter anyways. So I think you should probably try and get a veteran quarterback. Maybe it's not Aaron Rodgers, but Derek Carr is an upgrade for that Jets team. Maybe Jameis Winston even would be as well, although I think at that point you probably just stick with Mike White. I don't think the Jets should just say, no matter what, we're drafting a quarterback this year. I'm really not on board with this. They do have a lot of talent on that roster, but I would say focus on a vet like Derek Carr or especially Aaron Rodgers. If not, see what you got on the roster. This is a very common one I see. This is from Matt Throne. It says, Will Levis sucks. He's 24 and was pretty average against kids 2 to 3 years younger than him this season. This one's tough because we've talked about it a lot with the quarterbacks this year. A lot of it is based on projection and potential versus actual what we've seen right now. And with Will Levis, it's tough to say that he definitively sucks. I think there are things that you have to look at that you got to factor in situation and why he maybe wasn't as productive as somebody like Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. And Bryce Young, I think, is an outlier because he didn't actually have a ton of talent around him like you'd expect at Alabama. It was way worse than it has been. Still better than a lot of schools that you're going to find, but it wasn't great by Alabama standards. Their best receiver is probably not a top 3 receiver on the Ohio State teams that we've seen the past few years. So I don't think they were exactly cream of the crop this season. The offensive line wasn't even very good, and Jahmyr Gibbs was certainly the best non-Bryce Young player on that team. With Will Levis, who did he have? Lost Wan'Dale Robinson from the year previous. Still completed about 65% of his passes. The offensive line got worse this season and was never even all that good to begin with. So when you factor in that Will Levis is playing in the SEC, the best, toughest conference in college football, with a bad offensive line and not NFL caliber receivers the way that you see CJ Stroud with. He's got an NFL offensive line in front of him with very clear NFL receivers playing around him. Will Levis just didn't have any of that. I don't love the fact that he's 24. It's a bit older for a prospect that is certainly going to have to develop in order to be at that top tier. You picture, Lamar Jackson. How old is he right now? 25? Okay, Lamar just turned 26 a little over a month ago. Will Levis is turning 24, but you take a guy like Lamar Jackson, who's an outlier probably, right? But he's a few years away removed from winning an MVP, whereas Will Levis is currently a project coming into the NFL. I can understand the hesitancy there, but I've been burned on these type of players before. If they can develop, which is a big if, you do have a really, really good player on your hands because of the not only the mental ability, but the toughness that everyone raves about with Will Levis and the arm talent. There are things to like. Just from a pure tape standpoint, I'm not blown away with Will Levis. However, he does make some big-time throws that you have to be aware of as well. So I don't think that he sucks. I think that's really blowing things out of proportion. Obviously, he's getting first-round hype for good reason, even if he's not, one of the cleaner quarterback prospects we've ever seen. There's a reason he's getting that hype, and if put into a perfect scenario like we saw with Patrick Mahomes or like we've seen with Josh Allen as he developed, Will Levis could really be something. If he goes to a team like the Texans, though, that historically could not develop the quarterback position, I worry about him. But if he gets teamed up with a good offensive coordinator, good quarterback coach, friendly system, he could be a beast. This is an interesting one here from Shay. It says Michael Mayer. He meant an A instead of that E there in Meyer, the first one. But it says shouldn't be a first-round pick. And this is tough because tight end is one of those historically undervalued positions that you might not usually see go in the first round. And I would say center, running back, guard is on the fringe there, but I would say guard is first round pick position, but it's usually running back, center, tight end are the main ones, and then nose tackle and maybe safety are the positions that are kind of like, are they first round? Linebacker, I think you can throw in there as well. And, should those guys be first round picks just purely on positional value? And tight end is one of those lower valued positions. And then you factor in that this is a really strong tight end class. When you talk about Tucker Kraft from South Dakota State and Luke Musgrave from Oregon State. And then that's not even factoring in maybe the best tight end in the class, Dalton Kincaid from Utah. And, I love Darnell Washington from Georgia. You have a number of really, really talented tight ends. Sam Laporta from Iowa. You can go down the board and talk about all the talent at the tight end position. And you could make a really good argument that maybe you don't take Michael Mayer as a result because maybe you miss out on tight end 1A, but you could get 1B or 1C or 1D or 1E depending on what system you run and how you value the tight end position. If you need a bigger, better blocker, Darnell Washington is your guy that could be available in the second round. So if you want Michael Mayer, how far removed or how different is Dalton Kincaid or Luke Musgrave, who's a better athlete probably, although maybe you worry about injury a little bit with Luke Musgrave after missing pretty much all of 2022. So should you take a tight end in the first round when there's such great value, maybe just outside the first round, maybe in round 2, at the top of round 2 and in round 3? I don't know. And even Davis Allen from Clemson, I didn't even mention. There are so many good tight ends that I could get on board with that maybe he shouldn't be a first-round pick. Even if his talent is first-round worthy, there are so many talented tight ends in this class that you don't necessarily have to force one in round 1. And I think this is kind of like the same argument here from Drew, maybe? It says Nathaniel Dell, Tank Dell from Houston. It should be a first-round pick. If you guys don't know Tank Dell, he is a receiver, I guess, for Houston. More of a return man, more of a gadget player. And he has first-round playmaking ability, but it just kind of goes back to not even just the previous conversation with tight end, but should a gadget player go in round 1 if he's going to be an awesome return man? Like, did the Vikings see that value in Cordero Patterson? He was a first-round pick, never really came on as a receiver, yet was one of the better return men we've seen probably in NFL history. Sounds crazy to say for Cordero Patterson, but it's true. And should Nathaniel Dell go in the first round as a result? Well, it's tough to justify what could be a primary return man in round 1. He's undersized, got a lot of juice, electric player. I don't know how you can rationalize that in round 1. And that's if he is at the very top end of that spectrum. Like, if you're going to take a kicker that you think can be Justin Tucker, which is saying something because that's probably the best kicker in NFL history, or at least right up there, depending on how you feel about, Adam Vinatieri and whatever, and Morton Anderson, I don't know. But even if he's that good, right? Can you rationalize taking that player in the first round? Maybe at the top of round 2. It's tough to say because it's a kicker in that sense, right? Can you take a return man in the first round? I don't think so. This is something that we've talked about for a while on this channel, and it's that, is Anthony Richardson better than Will Levis? And for me, the answer as a prospect is yes. Where are they going to be in 3 to 5 years? That's going to depend a lot on where they go and how they develop, obviously, as a result. For me, as prospects, I see Anthony Richardson as a younger, faster, with a bigger arm even than Will Levis, who is maybe even more comfortable in the pocket than Will Levis is. So when I see Anthony Richardson, I see a guy who is 100% worth taking a shot on. And I will not fault any team for taking Anthony Richardson round 1. I know a lot of you see him as like a defensive end or a tight end or a receiver. You see more athlete than quarterback, but I don't know if you've watched him. I think maybe you've seen the stats and you've completely said that Anthony Richardson cannot play the quarterback position. He's a year 1 starter or a 1-year starter at Florida, which is already not an extremely quarterback-friendly system in my opinion. It was not really designed to air the ball out. They were run first. They were a lot of RPO, and you don't really give yourself much of a chance to show off as a quarterback when you're in that type of a system. But what Anthony Richardson did as a runner was incredible, but what he did as a passer to me was also incredibly impressive. He was inconsistent at times, but man, can he make some amazing throws and some amazing plays. He throws the ball with a tremendous amount of velocity, and he's someone that just needs to continue to develop and polish his game. But he's someone that is pretty comfortable as a pocket passer. Just like Lamar is, he's so dynamic as a runner that you think, oh, he's just a scrambler. But just like Lamar with Anthony Richardson, these are mobile quarterbacks that look to throw first. And that's what's so impressive to me about AR is I see a quarterback more than just an athlete. And I think, again, in the right system, this is someone that not only is going to be good, but can flourish. I don't see any possible way that he isn't, at the very minimum, exactly what Justin Fields was this past year for Chicago. And that was obviously an amazing fantasy quarterback, but his running ability is right there with Justin Fields. He's got a huge arm. If you put Anthony Richardson into that same offense, I don't think the result would be too drastically different. I know that's going to seem like a hot take, but the running ability is right there. I don't think that's debatable. And then the arm is in the same conversation for me. I think Fields at Ohio State was a better passer because they did it more and they stretched the field more and they had way better receiving options. Anthony Richardson's best receiver might have been Ricky Pearsall, but I could see a very similar player and skill set. This is an interesting one here too from Dacky Dimes. Says Kelee Ringo is still CB1 because of traits and athleticism. Just look at Sauce and Woolen. So those are, I would say, not necessarily comparable because Sauce Gardner is a freak. He's someone with the unbelievable size, but also really clean, smooth hips and is someone that moves really, really well. Change of direction is basically as good as you're going to find from anyone that size, and that's part of why he went top 5. He was a really clean prospect and did not get beat. So he was just a really awesome prospect, so you lose me with Sauce Gardner. Tariq Woolen, maybe have a conversation, even though Woolen is bigger and faster than Kelee Ringo, although it's tough to be bigger or faster than Tariq Woolen. It's pretty unbelievable how athletic he is. But is Ringo CB1 because these guys happen to be very good? Woolen is the outlier. Sauce is a complete physical outlier. But Woolen is the guy that was more athlete than corner and ended up developing in the perfect system. Kelee Ringo could be that. He is probably the worst athlete of the three, which it sounds insane because he's such a great athlete, but Woolen at least is better. And then Sauce is, maybe in that conversation. But Ringo is a little bit shorter despite being bigger. I would say in terms of like denser muscle mass. But Ringo he struggles to find the ball in the air. He's beat more often. If you can develop him, you have a lot to work with there. But in this cornerback class, all of the corners are big and fast with long arms, and some of them are better in coverage than Ringo. So it's tough for me to rationalize that Kelee Ringo is CB1 when I look at Christian Gonzalez and I say, you know what? He's just as big as Kelee Ringo pretty much in terms of like height and arms. So if he's way better in coverage, how is Ringo better than him as a prospect? It's tough for me to rationalize that. However, I do see a world where Kelee Ringo develops and is one of the better corners in the league at the top end of that scale. So it is really tough for me to say that he's a bad player or a bust because he's unpolished. That's what's so difficult about scouting for the draft every year because you just don't know how these guys are going to develop. Ringo's got a lot of traits, a lot of athleticism, a lot of tools in the toolbox. He's just an unfinished product the way a lot of these guys are. He is not my CB1, but I could see why some would have him in that spot. I love this one from Cody. He says, the Bears should trade with Houston from 1 down to 2. Even if the return isn't huge, they could get Houston's return and still have a team move up to number 2 to get even more. Now, the back end of that I feel like is a little bit more far-fetched, although I could see it happening. But the biggest reason the Bears should move down from 1 just to 2 if the Texans are looking to move up, which don't say that they're not because they could be. If the Texans want to take a quarterback, which is very much in play for them with Davis Mills as their current quarterback, why would the Texans not do it and take their QB1? Why would they just risk whoever falls to them at 2? Like, maybe it still is your QB1. Do you want to roll the dice on that position? I'm not sure that they would. So yeah, like you got screwed because you won in the final week of the season, gave the Bears the #1 pick. Like, I get that. But at the same time, if you're Houston and you have a clear QB1 in this class and you want to take a QB this year, move up to 1. It may not take a ton because you're only moving up 1 spot. And for the Bears, you have motivation to do so. Because if you move down with the Colts from 1 to 4, who's to say that Jalen Carter and Will Anderson don't end up going 2 and 3? That could happen. And then you're Chicago, you find yourselves at number 4, and the top 2 players in the draft might be off the board. So do you settle for Tyree Wilson, who is not on that same level exactly as a prospect? Do you take a tackle? Do you trade down even more? You really could put yourself in a rough spot if things do not play out perfectly. Now there is a world clearly where the Bears move down from 1 to 4 with the Colts, say. Colts go QB at 1, Texans go QB at 2, and then the Cardinals take either Will Anderson or Jalen Carter at 3, and you can take the best of the rest at 4. It certainly happen. But it's a risk to run. I think if the Texans are offering a good enough package for that number 2 pick, move down 1 spot and reevaluate when it comes to it. I like this. I also like this from 3 and Out. 3 and Out says, hot take, Packers finally load up on offense in early rounds and make some trades once Rodgers leaves. I don't know about trades necessarily, but think about it. When you have Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history without question, and won MVP as far back as, the year before this one? And the year before that one? Aaron Rodgers can still play. And when you have that type of a player at quarterback, guess what? You don't necessarily need to invest in a really great receiver, even though he had Devontae Adams. I get it. Nice second-round pick. Ended up being the best receiver in the league, at least for a time, if not still, although certainly up for debate. Why would you really load up on offense when you have a QB that can just make the offense really good no matter what, seemingly? Rodgers goes, find yourself in a bit of a tough spot. Jordan Love, I think, can still be a really good player, but who knows? So why not give your young quarterback, who is essentially going to be a rookie if he starts for the first time, right? The same way Patrick Mahomes was not a rookie during what I would call his rookie season, the way baseball does it. Why not give him some talent? Get a really good tackle in the mix. Get a really good receiver in the mix, or a really great tight end for him to lean on. I'm trying to remember Jordan Love at Utah State. I don't really remember a super standout receiver. I almost want to say Siosi Mariner, but that's kind of like a crazy pull. Did he go to Utah State? I don't remember Jordan Love really leaning on a tight end. I think Darwin Thompson might have been there as well. I think a 7th round pick by the Chiefs a couple of years ago. I think they were on the same team, but there wasn't a ton there, and he still looked pretty good. But I think you'd want to maybe give him something to lean on, like a receiver 1 or a tight end that's really, really great as a receiver. So you look at maybe Michael Mayer or Dalton Kincaid. Oh, I forgot about Devin Tompkins. Siosi Mariner was receiver 1 on that team. How I remember him, I cannot even tell you, maybe because it's just a Hall of Fame name. Apparently he only played 1 season at Utah State as well. What a pull. Now, Darwin Thompson was not on that 2019 team, but he was on the 2018 team with Jordan Love, so I'll count it. But I think if A-Rod leaves, you got to load up on offensive talent to support your young QB. If he needs a chance, or if you want to give him a chance, I think you got to do it. All right, Bronco has a hot take from his buddy. Says, my friend thinks Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama, the Georgia Tech transfer, could be a better player than Bijan Robinson from Texas if he ends up on the right team. I think there's certainly a world where this happens. And I think Bijan is a really special talent because when he's going to get tackled for loss or maybe only pick up a yard or 2, he turns those into 7 or 8 yard gains. And so that's not going to be something that is, I think, immediate to the average fan. They're not going to see just a 7 or 8 yard run and think, oh man, what a special play. But they are special plays when it was going to be a loss potentially, right? Bijan Robinson doesn't necessarily have the home run speed that Jahmyr Gibbs has, and I think that could be the difference. They're both awesome receivers, for sure. Jahmyr Gibbs just has more juice. And I think when I see Jahmyr Gibbs, I really do see a Jamal Charles type player. And Charles, also from Texas, ended up being a 3rd round pick, wasn't drafted especially high, a little bit undersized. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, weighs a pound more. I think Jamal Charles was 5'11", 199, and Jahmyr Gibbs is 5'11", 200. They're the same size. Same size. Both can offer you a really nice receiving option out of the backfield. Both have electric speed. So with Jahmyr Gibbs, right, you might have a player like Jamal Charles, whereas Bijan could end up just being a really, really solid player. The common comparison I see is Saquon. I don't really see that all the way. There are similarities for sure, but I don't really think that's too good of a comp in my opinion. And for me, that would especially come down to like vision and, you know, actually running in between the tackles. Saquon before this year was really a guy that would just bounce everything outside or try to. And Bijan is not that guy, even though he's capable of doing so. So I can't really give you a good comp for Bijan right now, but it just, would you prefer the consistency of what will just probably be a 4 to 4.5 yards per carry guy in the NFL that's just going to be really, really solid, or Jahmyr Gibbs that could be the home run threat, big hitter that could end up being like Jamal Charles if everything works out? I don't know. This is one I like too, but it's a really tough one to answer. Brian Branch will end up being the best defender out of his class. How often would we say that about a slot corner or safety? Probably not very often. The edge rushers will always get the love, maybe, you know, cornerbacks as well, interior defensive linemen, but it's generally going to be those positions that get a lot of the shine. Like, would you ever say that Mike Hilton or Kenny Moore was one of the best players in their draft classes? You probably wouldn't, even though they probably are. It's a really tough thing to say that Brian Branch will be, you know, the best defender out of the class, because he is a slot corner, potential safety. I think he's an amazing player. I love Brian Branch. I do. But is that going to be the general perception? I would say probably not. If an edge rusher or a corner or any defensive lineman in general is close to him as a player, that's going to be the guy that we probably collectively view to be the better player. And I think we'll end it with 2 receiver hot takes. Leviticus says Kayshon Boutte is the best receiver in the class. And this is a really, really tough one to answer because, first of all, I can get on board with this. If you saw Kayshon Boutte a couple of years ago at LSU, you would certainly have this opinion. Electric as a ball carrier. So great at forcing missed tackles. He's like A.J. Brown in that way, but is more explosive than A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is just the complete package at receiver to this point. Amazing route runner, one of the best true separators in the NFL, with which Kayshon Boutte is certainly not. Boutte doesn't have as good of hands. I'm not comparing him to A.J. Brown, but just as a player after the catch, that ability to break tackles, I think, is on a similar level. Boutte's going to have some problems with the hands, some concentration drops. Maybe you could throw that into effort. And he's just really not polished as a receiver. But if you give me a couple years and you tell me, hey, Kayshon Boutte focused on football and developed as a player, would I have any trouble believing that he would be the best receiver in this 2023 draft class? Absolutely not. At the same time, if he flames out, it wouldn't be particularly shocking to me. So I think he definitely could be. It's going to be about situation and, I think, maturity and development with Kayshon Boutte. And the last one, we'll tie these two together. Lassie says Zay Flowers is going to be the first selected wide receiver. Caleb says Zay Flowers is the best receiver in the draft, and it isn't close. We'll kind of package this into one. One, I could buy that Zay Flowers is the first receiver off the board. One, because he has electric speed, and that just sometimes gets drafted highly. You know, we saw Henry Ruggs be the first receiver off the board in his class. John Ross was the top 10 pick, although I believe Corey Davis actually went ahead of him in that draft class. You know, speed kills. It's the same reason I could buy Jalen Hyatt being the first receiver off the board. Speed is incredibly valuable. As cliche as it sounds, it cannot be coached. That is a very highly valued trait, especially at receiver. So for me, Zay Flowers or Jalen Hyatt in a weaker receiver class could be the first receiver off the board. It's a question of who the first team is that takes a receiver. And for me, Zay Flowers, clearly the best receiver in the class. It isn't close. It's definitely close. Even if he's the best, it's definitely close. He's only about 5'9", 170 pounds, maybe I want to say. You worry about durability and being a 3-level threat, as I talked about to Dane Brugler. I'm going to have that video out at some point on the channel. I think we're going to do running backs first, though. Zay Flowers maybe is the best receiver in the draft, and that's kind of how I am with all these receivers. You could sell me on Jordan Addison. That's probably my wide receiver 1. Quentin Johnson still needs some developing to do. Certainly, Jalen Hyatt, you worry about him as a route runner, but has electric speed and great hands, so development with him. And Zay Flowers, you worry about size. Jackson Smith and Jigba, you worry about overall athletic profile and staying healthy. I don't know. It's really tough, but no matter what, I think it is close. But that's pretty much going to do it for these. I couldn't get to all of them. I had nearly 750 replies and then 7 quote tweets, which I don't look at because don't be special. Just reply like everybody else. And I'll see you in the next one. Hit that subscribe button for more. Take it easy. Oh, yeah, and the one from the thumbnail. No.